Welcome, everyone, to the Wizard of Radical Self-Respect. My name's Jared Mello. Today, we're going to break down some Dr. Ramani on the Diary of a CEO. And she goes over things like how to spot a narcissist, what's the difference between an a-hole and a narcissist, male versus female narcissists, as well as many other things too. Well, I'm not sure we'll play the whole thing, but we'll go through a good chunk of it here, and it'll give us some good dialogue to go over because many things I agree with her on, but there's a couple things that I might differ with her slightly, and that's what we'll go over here. So let's jump right in.
Do you spend time, even today, dealing with patients who are the victim of a narcissistic relationship or the victim of a narcissist?
Every week. I mean, it's probably one of the, if not the most gratifying part of my week. I'm a big believer that if you're a mental health practitioner, you practice mental health. So that's a privilege to be able to be in that room and to work with clients. But it would be so easy when you're dealing at a macro level, large populations going on YouTube, writing books, to get distanced from what is happening to individual people's lives. One of the tricky bits with research is
And I wonder if Dr. Ramani still does see one-on-one clients. I'm not sure if she even does.
we study populations, we study samples, right? We study hundreds of people. What happens in the room is something very different. And you start to recognize, A, how badly these relationships harm people, their schemas of the world, their schemas of themselves, and B, how much potential for intervention there is with these clients through very, very simple approaches around education about narcissism, validation of their experience, breaking through self-blame, and teaching them to trust themselves.
So, how many patients do you think you've seen that have been victims of narcissists?
I mean, hundreds, really. And I even use the word survivor. I hate to call them victims because I don't even think they're that passive. I mean, I think that they just weren't, no one ever taught anyone this, right? I'll give you the example. When people are in a relationship with somebody who's living with addiction, it's very clear what they're dealing with, right? You have a person, they're using a substance that's altering them, that's altering their behavior, that's taking them away from who they are. People in relationships with addicts will say, I'm in two relationships. I'm in a relationship with a sober person, and I'm in a relationship with somebody who's using or intoxicated or denying or defending their use, right? Two people. And it breaks the people in those relationships. And we're willing to call it that. The experience people have in narcissistic relationships in a way is no different, with the added bit, though, that at least with addiction, people can say, I see what the behavior is. I see what the issue is. Addiction's a disease, and we know it's treatable. Narcissism, not so much. And on top of that, the narcissistic person has this very well-developed, very successful behavioral repertoire. They can go out in the world and they're able to be charming and charismatic and confident and smart and the center of attention and running companies. And behind closed doors, they psychologically eviscerate the people they're with. Spouses, partners, family members, close friends, maybe people who are below them in an organization, people where they can kind of get away with it. So the people they're harming, the world thinks this person's fantastic. At least a person who's in a relationship with an addict, people say, okay, I get it. They're using, this is hard.
And that's a good point. As we always say, narcissists are completely different people behind closed doors than they are in public a lot of times. But here's the other part about it too. Narcissists can absolutely be addicts as well. And there's an argument to be made that all narcissists are really addicts to narcissistic supply anyway. They need their fuel and they're going to do whatever they can to get it. So you can make an argument for that too. The other thing to note here is this, that some narcissists will try to use the fact that they have an addiction problem as an excuse for their behavior. That can happen. And granted, not every addict who does that is a narcissist, by the way, but this is something I've seen happen a lot. A lot of narcissistic people, they'll also be an addict and they'll try to use that as a get out of jail free card. Oh, I cheated because I'm an addict. I did this because I'm an addict. And that's something to pay attention to, where in that case, it doesn't matter if it's addiction or narcissism. Problematic behavior is still problematic behavior. And some people who have struggled with addiction, they might have a problem with that. But I've gone through addiction and I don't have a problem saying that. I think actions are actions. And just because the cause of those actions might be different sometimes doesn't make those actions any better. And a lot of people want to think, oh, well, if the cause is different, it should be a different outcome. You should think of it differently. And I usually just don't. I think if the behaviors are really that similar, problematic behavior is problematic behavior. But people that have been in relationships with addicts, that can be tough in its own way as well, because they're a completely different person when they're under the influence, and then they have to go through the emotional ups and downs. Often they're medicating some sort of mood disorder or mental illness as well. So there's a lot of different variables at play. It's like, show me an addict that doesn't also have some kind of mental health thing going on. You're probably not going to see one. They're at least going to have some sort of mood disorder or something.
But for the folks in narcissistic relationships, a lot of people say, aren't you lucky that you're married to that guy? And the person's like, oh my gosh, are these people out of their mind? Like, so what do? They blame themselves.
Okay. What is narcissism?
Mm-hmm.
Because I've heard the word used so often,
Mm-hmm.
but I couldn't tell you the definition of it. And I
Mm-hmm.
feel like I'd butcher the definition of what it is.
Mm-hmm. So I'm almost curious.
Let's see what Dr. Ramani says here. What is the definition of narcissism? We just went over between Dr. Eatonson and Dr. Salerno what their definitions are. So let's see what Dr. Ramani says.
To ask you,
Yeah.
what, just before I almost contaminate you with what my definition is, what's your working definition? What's your working model of what narcissism is?
Delusions of grandeur, someone
Mhm.
that thinks they're like super important and that they are better than everybody else, arrogance, and they're cruel.
Okay. All right. So I would give you probably like a C plus, B minus
Okay,
if
you
you're a
can be
student
kind.
in my class. I mean,
Yeah,
I
yeah.
cut students a lot of slack back in
Yeah.
the day. So I'll give you a C plus, B minus, because you're in the neighborhood, right?
Okay.
The grandiosity, the arrogance, the meanness, but that to me is even more sort of a manifestation of the traits, like the grandiosity, the arrogance. They have variable empathy and typically have low empathy. They're deeply entitled. They truly think they're more special than everyone else and that the rules should apply to them very differently. They have a excessive need for admiration and validation. They're very superficial. They don't really have the capacity for deep, sustained, intimate relationships. They're very much referential to the world out there, outside of them, to set goals. They don't have a good internal sense of like what matters to me, what do I want to do. They just want to do what they do, again, to get that admiration and validation. And there's a shallowness, a real emotional shallowness to narcissism. Those are the patterns and traits we sort of see. They're very, very self-centered, very preoccupied with themselves, the good parts of themselves, the bad parts of themselves. It's very rare for them to sort of lift their heads up and genuinely notice the experience of another person. That's what narcissism is. How does it show up? It shows up as devaluation.
I mean, that's a pretty good definition there. I think that's mostly what it is. I don't know if she mentioned the self-esteem regulation aspect of it, because that is what you would say narcissistic abuse is, right? Narcissistic abuse is using another self-object as a way to regulate their own self-esteem. She didn't really go that deep into it, but she explains some of the other behaviors and how they can look.
Evaluation, dismissiveness, manipulation, gaslighting. They get angry very quickly, especially when they're frustrated or disappointed, and that can show up as overt rage or overt anger, yelling, screaming, or even violence. That can show up as passive aggression, withholding and withdrawing. They're prone to betrayal, they lie, they cheat, they make promises about the future they never keep, but they do that to keep people around so they won't leave them. So it's part of a larger sort of a manipulation. They will dominate people. They have to get the last word. They will shift blame onto other people. They will rarely take responsibility for their misdeeds, even when they're clearly caught in them. And if they do, they'll still blame the other person. They're very neglectful and careless in relationships. That is narcissism.
So I would also say there that she's talking about the behaviors, but the big ones to me would be grandiose, either covert or overt, antagonistic, covert or overt, and impaired empathy. To me, that's what it is. And so you have the grandiosity. That's when you have feelings of superiority and grandiosity, which also leads into a sense of entitlement, which also leads into exploitative behaviors, which also leads into the hypersensitivity to criticism and perceived criticism, which also leads into the impaired empathy. That's what I would say. And what she's talking about are how those traits present themselves. And so that was a pretty decent breakdown of how those traits present themselves and the behaviors in, if you're in a relationship with one, those behaviors are what you're going to see. You're going to see that blame shifting. You're going to see lying. You're going to see a lack of accountability. That's what you're going to see as the behaviors that show up.
How can you tell the difference between someone having a bad day, an asshole, and a narcissist? Because some of those things there, I thought, yeah, on a bad day, I might do that.
Yeah.
You know, the whole collection together, no.
Mhm.
But on a bad day when I haven't slept, okay, do you know what? I might blame someone or whatever else. What's
Okay.
the distinction?
A good question here by Stephen. What's the difference between a narcissist, asshole, and someone just having a bad day? Let's see what Dr. Ramani says.
When a person has a bad day, and we all have bad days, and on those bad days, we might look, if the only tape someone had of us was of that day, ooh, right? But here's the piece. When people are not narcissistic and they have bad days, they will take accountability, they will make amends, and they will change their behavior and say, I'm not doing this again. This is not okay. Why wasn't it okay? Because it was none of those people's fault. You didn't get enough sleep. And whether that means we reach deeper to be as kind as we can to the people, in some cases, especially if it's people we know or we see again, you may not know the random person at the gym, but if someone we know or work with, we step out of ourselves to say, the way I conducted myself yesterday wasn't okay. And I'm really sorry about that.
And that's a good one. Accountability plus change behavior. That's something that people that are not narcissists should be able to do. I agree.
And so that they're having that experience of you taking accountability. That's where I know we're not dealing with a narcissistic person. We're dealing with a bad day. And a bad day is just that, a day. It's not every day. With a narcissistic person, many days, I'm not going to say all, but many days are characterized by these machinations, these manipulations, and these invalidations. The person in a relationship with a narcissistic person feels like they're constantly on their back foot, that they can't be themselves. They can't express a need. They can't express a want. They can't even express a feeling for fear of it being shut down.
And that's another good thing she mentioned previously there too. Not all days with a narcissist or an abuser are bad days. That's a big one people get tripped up on. They'll confuse some good days for a good relationship. But I had made a post on Facebook earlier and it said, all ceasefires with narcissists are temporary ceasefires. They will go on the offensive again at some point. It always comes back to that. The good days, there can be some, they're not all bad days, and that can definitely confuse people and it can be tricky, but the bad days always come back around again. So you can't confuse the good days for a good relationship. You have to take a step back and see the bigger picture. And the bigger picture is, if you're truly dealing with a narcissistic person, the only way to win is to not play that game.
So there's your not narcissistic person. What about an asshole? Okay. I do think assholery and narcissism are pretty, we use the terms interchangeably. I think though that here's my asshole belief, since this is something, I think the construct validation on asshole is probably still needing to be done. I think
Now, I have a definition of a diagnosed asshole before she gets into this, but I had said a diagnosed asshole is someone that's rude or obnoxious, extremely selfish, or inconsiderate of others on a consistent basis. And there's specific asshole behaviors you can do. An example would be lying is an asshole behavior. Cheating is an asshole behavior. If you do enough asshole behaviors consistently, then I'll give you the diagnosis of asshole. But let's see what she says.
assholes tend to be pretty consistently assholes. So whereas narcissistic people they have a much wider behavioral repertoire to be absolutely charming. This is a person who can be absolutely charming on the golf course with the CEO of their company, like charming, nice, warm, remembering the ages of their kids and asking about the wife and remembering that their grandmother is sick and all this stuff, and get home forget it was his anniversary, scream at their partner. Why is the house look like this? Why do I have to put up with this? Make those damn kids shut up. But they were Mr. I remember that your little girl's birthday is February 6th when they were on the golf course. That is not assholery. That's narcissism.
And you see, I'm not so sure about that. I think there's versions of narcissists, of course. They'll be a completely different person behind closed doors than they are in public. But can there be versions of narcissists that are more assholes consistently in public and behind closed doors? I think that's a possibility too. Because are all assholes, are they always assholes at all times? No, I mean, there's certainly people that are very prickly. Absolutely. Right. But to say, are they assholes all the time? I would say it's rare for someone to be an asshole all the time. But so I don't know if that's the right distinction to make there between narcissist versus asshole. I think I know what she means. There's certainly an element of charm, and they'll have that charisma sometimes, like on the golf course, at the business meetings, etc. But I also think there's versions of it that might be a little more antagonistic. Always, like they might try to hold it in. But Christian and I talked about this too, that narcissists are not turning their narcissism off and on. The narcissistic operating system is always on. It might not appear to be on to the outside world, but it is still on. But it's an interesting discussion. I'm not saying I know the exact answer to this, the right answer, but I do think there's narcissists that can be more consistently assholes as well. But I would also say, show me a narcissist that is also not an asshole. I'll wait, but I don't think anyone would be able to do that. So it gets tricky in that regard.
Can you cure narcissism, in your opinion?
No, I don't, because I think that would imply changing a personality, which I don't think we can do.
Is there any evidence? Have you ever seen in your 20 years of working with narcissists and their survivors any sign of a narcissist becoming a not narcissist or a non-narcissist?
This is a big one. Can someone change? That's a narcissist. Let's see what she says. And I was having this discussion on Instagram too. There was a person that I think they're a therapist. They were telling me, because I posted a clip between Dr. Eatonson and Dr. Salerno, that she's gotten some narcissists, once they've gotten through their self-deception, to change and have more empathy. To which I said, well, trust their actions. They can say whatever they want. You can see what they do in your office there, but it's a completely different story what they're doing at home. It's a completely different story when they're not in the actual office there. So any change, you're going to have to see it with your actions first, with their actions first and foremost. And that's the other thing. I wouldn't even think about a narcissist changing unless they become willing to admit they have a problem. They have humility. They have honesty. They become willing to change. And then they put in the footwork to change. And then they have resilience to change. If you don't really see those things, you don't see anything different, I wouldn't even dream of telling someone, oh yeah, they changed. No, you have to see a lot of footwork. You'd have to see a lot of changes. And for the most part, we just don't see that. So we don't tell people to even hold out hope for that for the very most part. But let's see what Dr. Ramani said.
I've not seen them become a not narcissist. I've seen them make micro changes because I measure and monitor and make my notes in therapy. So I'll see, interesting. They're no longer trying to mess with coming in 10 minutes later and asking me to keep them for the whole hour. They are honoring the therapeutic frame. They're paying the bill when they decide not to show up at the last minute. I see tiny tweaks. I'll see people who'll come in and say, I screamed at my girlfriend again last night and that wasn't cool. So I was like, whoa, that's insight. Like I'll run with it. But here's the rub. Okay. These micro changes, and they are micro changes, but they are changes and they're in the right direction. That much water under the bridge for the family members and partners and other people that have been harmed. They're saying, you want me to stay in this relationship because this dude remembered to say thank you once this week? I think not. To me, the thank you is progress. To the people in their lives who've been harmed, that one thank you is not.
If you...
We get into some interesting...
God dang it. And that's a good But that is a good distinction there too. So what's progress to the therapist is not always going to seem like progress to the people that live with them. And rightfully so. Rightfully so, because the therapist sees one thing, but the reality in their real life can be completely different. But where was I on this?
Closed doors, they psychologically eviscerate the people they're with. They're prone to betrayal, they lie, they cheat, they make promises about the future they never keep. The narcissistic person feels like they're constantly on their back foot, that they can't be themselves, they can't express a need, they can't express a want, they can't even express a feeling for fear of it being shut down. So there's your not narcissistic person. What about an asshole? Okay, I do think assholery and narcissism are pretty, that's narcissism.
Can you cure narcissism, in your opinion?
No, I don't, because I think that would imply changing a personality, which I don't think we can do.
Is there any evidence? Have you ever?
And so I agree, there's no cure to narcissism either, right? Especially if they have a brain impairment, they have less gray matter in the parts of the brain responsible for empathy, then yeah, that's not going away. Now, how much can neuroplasticity play a part in improving that? I don't even know. I'm not even sure that's even possible, right? But that's what some people would say. Neuroplasticity is a thing. We can change our brains. But with them, I don't know if there's any studied cases of that ever happening. The most that could ever happen is behavior modification. But again, do not hold out hope that any kind of narcissistic person is going to change. You would have to trust their actions more than anything.
Ever seen in your 20 years of working with narcissists and their survivors any sign of a narcissist becoming a not narcissist or a non-narcissist?
I've not seen them become a not narcissist. I've seen them make micro changes because I measure and monitor and make my notes in therapy. So I'll see, interesting. They're no longer trying to mess with coming in 10 minutes later and asking me to keep them for the whole hour. They are honoring the therapeutic frame. They're paying the bill when they decide not to show up at the last minute. I see tiny tweaks. I'll see people who'll come in and say, I screamed at my girlfriend again last night and that wasn't cool. So I was like, whoa, that's insight. Like, I'll run with it. But here's the rub, okay? These micro changes, and they are micro changes, but they are changes and they're in the right direction. That much water under the bridge for the family members and partners and other people that have been harmed. They're saying, you want me to stay in this relationship because this dude remembered to say thank you once this week? I think not. To me, the thank you is progress. To the people in their lives who've been harmed, that one thank you is not going to be enough.
Correct. So again, we went over that before, but that's a good distinction, right? What the therapist sees, that's not going to be what the people at home are really going to care about. The therapist might think, oh yeah, they learned to say, they admit they did something wrong. But to all the baggage that's already occurred, that's just a small thing to the people that live with them. And that's not enough. It's not enough to want to stick it out.
When I was looking at the subject of narcissism and I was looking at what people are searching around the subject matter, I could see no searches online for, is my wife a narcissist? But I saw lots of searches for, is my husband a narcissist?
Really?
Yes. So I wondered, is narcissism a gender specific thing? And in what proportion do you typically see men and women being?
So what I say is, it is not a gender specific thing. They used to think that narcissism is a male disorder and borderline was the female disorder. And that's the reason why they'll say there's way more diagnosed narcissists that are men than women. And there's way more diagnosed borderlines that are women than men. But now they realize that's actually, they were doing it a little bit wrong. They were being a little too general. So I think there could be a pretty close to even amount of men and women with a narcissistic operating system. That's the part that I think is important, not if they get diagnosed with NPD, because I don't like how it's diagnosed for one, and most people are just not getting diagnosed for two, so it's really hard to even know what those numbers are. So I would think there could be a close to even amount of men and women with a narcissistic operating system. And I also think there's more male borderlines than they used to think as well. So they used to think women were borderline, but now I think there's a good chunk of men that are also borderline. So let's see what Dr. Ramani says.
Narcissists.
Yeah, no, it's not gender specific. I'm so shocked at that because I've worked with so many men who have narcissistic wives or female partners. And I've worked with many worked with many lesbian couples. I've worked with cases where clearly it was a woman, female identified person who was narcissistic. It is definitely not limited to men. So here's what we know. Grandiose narcissism, much more common in men. Malignant narcissism, much more common in men. But there's a form of narcissism called vulnerable narcissism. Vulnerable narcissism isn't so much of the showy, charismatic, charming, look at me, arrogant, salesy, attention-seeking narcissist. The vulnerable narcissist is more socially anxious, victimized, sullen, resentful, aggrieved, and often we sort of see a failure to launch, right? There's sort of I'm angry at the world. How come I never got my turn? How come she got that? And, I was better than him. I should have gotten that. There's like
Victimhood.
Yeah, victimhood. Okay. That's called vulnerable narcissism.
So here's the thing about that, though, too. There's new research that says vulnerable narcissism might just be borderline. That's for one. And two, a lot of the clinicians, they don't really make a distinction with the covert narcissist. They just go grandiose versus vulnerable. And there's a lot of people who thought, oh, vulnerable and covert are really just interchangeable. But that's not really how I would see it. What I see it as is a covert narcissist, their traits of narcissism are just more covert. That's how I see that. Vulnerable narcissism, to me, I'm not even sure if that would be considered part of a narcissistic operating system, in my opinion. This is not the clinical literature, but in my opinion, I think that's a little bit different. And that's one of the reasons between Dr. Salerno and Dr. Eatonson, it seems like they're talking about two different things sometimes. And I think that's one of the reasons why. I think sometimes Dr. Eatonson's talking more about the vulnerable type, and Dr. Salerno, he's talking about more of the grandiose antagonistic type. And that could explain some of their differences of opinion. But so she'll say here that women are more likely to be vulnerable. I would say women are definitely more likely to be covert narcissists. Absolutely. Because you're not going to see them. Although I'll say this, in this day and age, there are more grandiose women as well. I think we're seeing more of that. You see that in the boss babe era here and the social media era and people becoming influencers. Yeah, that's a little more grandiose there, of course. And so I think there's more and more women who are also grandiose because they have more of an outlet to show it even. I think before social media, there wasn't an outlet. But now the outlet is here. Social media is a stage. And narcissists, they can't help themselves but to get up there on that stage and start performing, because then they'll get attention, they'll get admiration, they'll get acknowledgement, they'll get all sorts of narcissistic supply. And if they're lucky, they'll also get status and they'll also get money. So what narcissist can resist all of that?
Right? When we look at vulnerable narcissism, gender balanced.
Okay, so these other types of narcissism, you named 4 types there. Grandiose narcissism.
Right. So that's our traditional sort of garden variety narcissism, the showy, charismatic, pretentious, preening, charming, attention-seeking, actually quite often quite successful narcissistic person. Unlike the vulnerable narcissists who are failure to launch, the grandiose narcissistic people often have big, big dreams and they'll execute. Not always. And they'll often burn bridges because they are, in fact, narcissistic. So they'll anger people or do shady deals or cut people out and all that stuff. But the grandiose narcissistic folks are often the larger than life folks. Now, if they are angry at you, if they feel let down by you, they will let you know. They can be very vindictive. They are not going to be very honest in a relationship. They're probably going to betray you. They're going to be mean to their partners. We can count on that too. But to the world at large, larger than life. That's the typical model. Now, the vulnerable narcissism is narcissist is what I just shared with you. That more vulnerable, victimized, socially anxious, angry, aggrieved, sullen, resentful, failure to launch narcissist. Okay. Some people would argue they're one and the same, that as long as a grandiose narcissistic person is well supplied, things are going well, they're getting lots of attention, they're making money, they're just sort of feeling like they're the person, they're good, then they're going to stay in their grandiose mode. However, if the thing tips and everything goes wrong for the grandiose narcissist, they lose the money, they lose the job, they lose the partner, they lose social status, the vulnerable stuff will start showing up. The victimhood, the resentment, this is a witch hunt, everyone's out to get me. It can almost feel sort of low-grade paranoid. You're either more one than another. So the vulnerable narcissist could definitely have a grandiose moment if everything turned for them. But some people are just more grandiose. Some people are more vulnerable, but they do have the other underbelly. That's how that looks. Now, the malignant narcissist, which is another type I talked about, this is where we see the most severe form. And when I say most severe in terms of how it shows up in relationships, I'd say the most problematic form of narcissism. And here's where we see a form of narcissism that shows up as manipulativeness, exploitativeness, the willingness to take advantage of people, coerciveness, isolation, using menace as a tool of control, very vindictive, dangerous. It could be quite dangerous.
And I think regular narcissists can do those things too. I don't think it requires a malignant narcissist to do those things, to be manipulative, coercive, and exploitative. No, I mean, I think, and this is where I'll agree with the DSM, those are all traits of narcissism in the DSM. So I don't think you need to be a malignant narcissist to do that. What I'll say about a malignant narcissist is they're the narcissists that have antisocial personality disorder traits. And for those who don't know, psychopaths and sociopaths in the American DSM, they're just under the antisocial personality disorder umbrella. That's what they are. In other countries, they actually make distinctions between psychopaths and sociopaths, but not in America. In America, they're just under the antisocial personality disorder umbrella. And the malignant narcissist, they have the traits of antisocial personality disorder. And I would say they can be the most rageful and they can be very dangerous. A covert malignant narcissist, to me, can be one of the most extremely dangerous ones because it's covert.
This is why I always say malignant narcissism is the last stop on the train before you hit psychopathy station, because this is as close to psychopathy as you're going to get without it being psychopathy. And in fact, there's a personality model called the dark tetrad. And the dark tetrad is comprised of narcissism, psychopathy, Machiavellianism, which is sort of like that willingness to use other people for your own advantage, and sadism. I personally think there should be a fifth bit, which is paranoia, because I think these folks can be really think everyone's out to get them.
And that's a fair assessment there too. I can see the paranoia part. There does seem to be a lot of narcissistic types that also have that paranoia element, always accusing others of what they are guilty of themselves. That's why we'll say their accusations are really confessions. But you could say it's an element of paranoia. You can say it's them simply projecting, but I agree. That can certainly be a part of paranoia as well. And also, I'm not sure if you all noticed here, but there's only one stream. I got rid of the vertical stream. So we'll see how this plays out here. I don't know if people liked the fact that there was a vertical stream before too. There was more trolls in the vertical stream, but now there's just one stream. So we'll see how this plays out. I will say this though, I think I got more views. There's more viewers when I had the other stream here too. But we'll see. But what do you all think about this? Do you like the fact there's just one stream now? Or do you prefer it when there's two? Let me know in the comments here.
Model right now is those four pieces, right? Malignant narcissism has a lot of those top notes. The calculated, callous coldness, the shallow charm, the shallow superficial charm, intelligence, the lack of empathy, in some ways getting some pleasure out of seeing someone who wronged them being hurt. So again, it feels more dangerous. And that's malignant narcissism.
Is that your serial killers?
I would say the serial killers are probably more psychopathic, and psychopathy is definitely a different subtype. It's different. Psychopathy is something different than malignant narcissism. They're not the same thing. They look different, even genetically, and they look different, probably look different in the brain. Psychopathic people have They don't have remorse. They don't feel guilt. Whereas malignant narcissistic people they know they did something wrong. A psychopathic person, it's almost as though they don't understand what they did wrong, not because they have a mental deficit, but because they literally have zero capacity for empathy.
And the fourth type of
And I don't know if I even agree with that too. I think psychopaths, I think they do know. I think they can know. It's not that they don't know, it's that they don't care because they have the lack of empathy. So I think I'd even disagree with Dr. Ramani on that part.
narcissism.
So I gave you vulnerable, grandiose, malignant, and the fourth type is communal narcissism.
Let's rewind that part
right?
again.
Grandiose, malignant, a lot of those top notes. The calculated, callous coldness, the shallow charm, the shallow superficial charm, intelligence, the lack of empathy, in some ways getting some pleasure out of seeing someone who wronged them being hurt. So again, it feels more dangerous. And that's malignant narcissism.
Is that your serial killers?
I would say the serial killers are probably more psychopathic, and psychopathy is definitely a different subtype. It's different. Psychopathy is something different than malignant narcissism. They're not the same thing. They look different, even genetically, and they look different. Probably look different in the brain. Psychopathic people have they don't have remorse. They don't feel guilt. Whereas malignant narcissistic people they know they did something wrong. A psychopathic person, it's almost as though they don't understand what they did wrong, not because they have a mental deficit, but because they literally have zero capacity for empathy.
You see, I don't know. I don't know if that's the case with psychopaths there. They don't know. I think they know, they just don't care. So Dr. Simon would say, it's not that they're not aware, they just don't care. And it's not that they don't see, they disagree. So, and she's saying that narcissists, they can have the awareness that they've done something wrong. Yeah, I think they can both be aware when they've done something wrong.
And the fourth type of narcissism.
So I gave you vulnerable, grandiose, malignant, and the fourth type is communal narcissism. Right? Grandiose, malignant, vulnerable. Yes, the fourth type is communal narcissism. Communal narcissism is very interesting. It's a relatively new construct in the field. It came around 2003 is when I started reading some of the first papers by a guy named Gebauer. I think he was at the University of Munich at the time. And I loved the work. I thought it was absolutely compelling because it was this idea that there were people out there who were going to get their narcissistic supply, not through the usual, look at me, I'm so great, I'm going to do things so people tell me I'm great, but by doing good deeds, by being perceived as saviors, by being perceived as grand rescuers, humanitarians. So the communal narcissist is a person who gets their narcissistic supply, their praise, their admiration, their awe, by doing these good deeds. And that's the motivation for doing the good deeds, not the good deed in and of itself, not because you care about a refugee group, not because you care about the plight of animals, but because you want to be viewed as a good dude. And so that's the communal narcissist. Now,
and so what she's saying is they care more about the appearance of being the great person and getting the supply from appearing to be that person. And I would say those narcissists, that's just their version of supply. Like they'll also get supply in other ways as well. Just because you're a communal narcissist doesn't mean you're above other versions of supply. Doesn't mean money and status or sex, love, cheating, or drugs and alcohol even. It doesn't mean that those things won't be of interest to them as well. I think they will. So it's just that maybe that aspect of it might be one of their favorite versions of supply, but don't think that that means, oh, this is their only version of supply. No, they can still like the other things too.
What gets interesting, like with all forms of narcissism, all narcissism is on a spectrum. It's not an either or. From mild to severe, all of mental health is on a spectrum. There's no such thing as a black and white dichotomy in mental health. It's mild to severe, mild to severe. And what's interesting with communal narcissism, at the lowest ends, it's sort of like you're more like Instagram saviors. Like, look at me, I'm saving the world. But, like they're cleaning up the beach in their bikini. And I'm like, is this about how attractive you are? Is this about really trying to save the environment? Like, it really is about, are we talking about apps or are we talking about trash in the street? Like, what are we talking about? But they want the validation. Like, what a cool person you are for spending your weekend saving elephants. They're relatively harmless. They're moderately ridiculous, but they do get angry if people don't give them a big bravo for how humanitarian they are. You take communal narcissism all the way to the severe end of the spectrum, you're talking about a cult leader. These are now people who are saying, I have the answer to the universe. I know everything. I know you better than you. They'll bring people into cultic systems. They will completely, separate them from their sense of self and their sense of self-worth, have no problem doing it, and tell them that they're doing them a good thing the whole time. That's, to me, your severe cult leader, or I think all cult leader, forget severe. A cult leader is really probably where communal and malignant narcissism come together.
And speaking of cult leaders, I was a guest on Mark Vicente's show the other day. Not that he's a cult leader, but he was part of that famous cult, the NXIVM, I think it's called. And he's going to be on this show as well. But the first thing that's going to happen is I'm going to watch his movie that's coming out. And then once that movie's out, he's going to be a guest on the show. So that should be a pretty interesting thing. And I think we'll probably get into what he talked about in the movie, his experience with cults. I'll do my due diligence and homework on that part of it as well. But check me out on his show there, on his YouTube channel. I posted it in the community tab on my channel here, but we talked about things together that I don't talk about as much, whether it's the addiction part, autistic part, some of my other thoughts on, say, the guys out there that are part of the man-hating club and they're pandering to women for what? Money, attention, and admiration. We went over all sorts of things. So check that out.
The big question, how many people are narcissists?
This is a big question because our problem is this. There's really no good studies about this. It's tough to measure narcissism. Who's really going to cop?
So how many narcissists are there? I know what her answer is to this. And I would say we really just don't know. But what I do know is anyone who tries to cite to you, oh, it's just 1%, as a way to kind of make it seem like even talking about narcissism is ridiculous. Again, the diagnosis of NPD is not what matters. You can be abusive and damage and harm a lot of lives without having full-blown NPD. Let's get that out of the way. Secondly, that's not even the part that's important. The narcissistic operating system is important. So what's the percentage of people that have a narcissistic operating system? That's a damn good question. Is it 10%? 8%? 12%? I really don't know. I'm just spitballing here, but it's certainly more than 1%. Now, a severe narcissist, what are the percentages of severe? That might be like a smaller-ish. Maybe that's a couple percent, 2 to 3. But in terms of less severe and moderate narcissistic operating systems, there's more of those. That is not that uncommon. But what do you think? And let me know in the comments here what you think is the percentage.
To being really entitled or really manipulative. You often don't get people who are going to answer those questions in an honest, open way. When we look at the prevalence of narcissistic personality disorder that are done in what we call large-scale epidemiologic studies, we see the rates to be somewhere between 1% and 6%, but that's the diagnosis, and that's in really structured research settings. Narcissism is a person who has enough of the narcissistic personality style to be noticeable, to be experienced by others. It's a spitball number because we've never done the numbers. So I'd say if it's spitball numbers, probably sitting somewhere between 15 and 18%. I think that's a good guess, about 1 in 6 people. I think if you're in a major metropolitan area, it's going to be a little higher. I think
that's a pretty high number there by Dr. Ramani. So whenever someone tries to criticize us all, narcissism is so rare, we can say, Dr. Ramani said 1 in 6, 15 to 18%. And I guess, I don't know if she means NPD. I think that's what she means. And I don't even know if I think it's that high, but this, just so you know out there, 1 in 6 is what she says.
certain industries, it's going to be higher. I think in certain, maybe even cultures, it could be higher. So, but if you're going to just ask me for a global prevalence, I mean, I think it's my best guess. And I think a lot of folks in the field might agree with me. Again, enough of it that you would notice it, enough of it that people are being affected by it.
So you've met 6.
Okay. And so that's her distinction there. Not NPD is what she's referring to, but what I would consider a narcissistic operating system. She's saying 15%. And okay, I can get behind that. I can get behind that. And as a professional, she's seen probably more than me. I mean, I don't know how much older she is than me, but she's older than me. So 15% with a narcissistic operating system, I could see it. I'm picking up what Dr. Ramani's putting down.
Team members of mine, including me.
I have not.
So-
I've only met 4 of you. So you're still 2 men down. You're okay.
Okay.
You might still be coming
Okay.
it through.
Because my next question was, which one do you think it was?
So far, so bad for you because each one of us has been sweeter than the next. So, Stephen, you're in the hot seat right now.
Gosh, sugar. Okay, interesting. Okay, so I mean, 1 in 6 as a spitball number is scarily high.
That's interesting. You think it's scarily high. I mean, I think it's about. I mean, listen, we know how. I actually don't think it is. I think if you went to a small town, you might hit closer to 1 in 8, because I think a small town is almost based on a greater need for sociality. I think there's more interdependence in that kind of a situation. So narcissism isn't going to probably work as well.
Mhm.
But I mean, 1 in 6. I think if any of us really went home and did the soul searching, listed out the names of everyone we knew, the number's probably going to track.
Is that number increasing? Are we breeding narcissists because of the sort of social and societal changes that have occurred? I'm thinking about Instagram when you said that. I was thinking, is social media a narcissist creator?
I think it's a narcissist amplifier, but I don't think it's
That's a good way to put it.
a creator. Narcissism is a personality style, and like all personality styles, it's a social, emotional, developmental phenomenon that happens from infancy into adolescence. So somebody jumping onto Instagram when they're 18 and posting lots of selfies, they're a decent person. That's not going to turn them narcissistic. It might turn them boring, but I don't know that it would necessarily turn them narcissistic. I think it could take, if somebody's got the traits, they have the tendency to need the validation and admiration. And again, a person posting selfies, that doesn't make them narcissistic.
Because Jack went on holiday up this mountain and he posted loads of photos.
Okay, so no, but
You know.
we have to. If Jack's a nice person, right? Jack is excited to share his trip with everyone, right?
But if he was kind of like rubbing it in.
Okay, so it's that's all right. Jack just lost some points there, poor Jack. But it's
Dr. Ramani missed his dry humor there, but she got it there.
but I would say this: what we'd want to know with anyone who's posted a lot of vacation photos, right? And they keep doing it. How present are they when you're actually with them? If you say like, listen, Jack is the loveliest person in the world, and Jack loves sharing his vacation trips, and there's a little bit of schadenfreude in there, like, you know, but he's a sweetie, then Jack's off the hook, right? I think though that what social media has become is it has taken, once upon a time, and you're probably you're not so young that you wouldn't remember this, but I remembered it as a full grown ass woman, is that I can tell you that if I go backwards to when I first heard about social media, I was already in my 40s at that point. And I remember looking at it, and I was already studying narcissism, and I said, oh God. And it was really like, it was almost like, Houston, we have a problem kind of thing. Someone else had shown it to me. And I thought to myself, this isn't going to create more narcissists. But once upon a time, for a narcissistic person to get validation, they'd actually have to have a shave and a shower and get out of the house. You couldn't just sit home and get validation. You had to go to work, get it in the family sphere, get it in your town bar or pub or something like that. But it wasn't going to come home from you just sitting on your ass at home taking pictures of yourself. Because I don't know if you've ever tried to take a picture of yourself with a camera. You're either going to catch your head or your mouth. Like, that's how we used to try to do it, right? So now there was a tool for these people to have a megaphone to say, look how wonderful I am. So a person who was already narcissistic, this was going to harness it, and sort of, it was an accelerant on a fire that was already burning.
But
I don't
keep it in the
believe.
house though, isn't it? Which sounds like it.
And that's what I have said before too. Social media doesn't create narcissists, but it gives them the opportunity to be more of what they already are. If you're already a narcissist, you have the narcissistic operating system, social media gives you the platform to be more narcissistic. And then with people who don't have a narcissistic operating system, it still might make them do more narcissistic behaviors, because it is simply the Pavlov's dogs. It's getting rewarded. Anything that gets rewarded is going to continue. whether that person has a narcissistic operating system or is narcissistic or not, I think it still might get rewarded. If you're online, you're creating content like me, what's getting rewarded? Doing things for attention, doing things that might be a little bit hyperbolic, doing things that might be a little controversial, that gets rewarded. And so anyone online, if you want to be successful as a content creator, you're almost forced to do some of that. You're almost forced to be a little bit grandiose out there. And it is what it is.
It's a safer place for it to be than wandering around the streets.
Yeah, well, the point is what keeping them at home rather than
Yeah.
But I still think that what it did though is now we get into a bigger philosophical question. This many people depicting lives that are, look how much better my life is than yours. Look how together I am. Look how great I'm doing. While that might be something the narcissistic people will do to offset their sense of insecurity, because that's sort of the core wound in narcissism, there are other
And so to go over something we're going over in the chat, they're talking about people had disagreed that small towns would have less narcissists than big cities. And I would say people are people, right? I don't know if there's going to be that much of a difference. Maybe New York and LA can be exceptions. And then George says here, doesn't city life foster greater narcissistic behaviors? I don't think it's that it fosters more narcissistic behaviors. I think it's that there's more avenues maybe for supply sometimes in a city. So a narcissistic person, they're going to gravitate maybe to cities. But those narcissistic people, they're born where they're born, right? Sometimes that's in the suburbs, sometimes it's in the city, sometimes their parents are narcissists, so they're likely to be in the city. But again, I wouldn't want to use that as a distinction. I think narcissists are everywhere. Small towns, suburbs, country bumpkin places, they can be anywhere really. There's just different types of narcissists that I think would gravitate to a city, right? Different versions of them that like that version of supply. But there's other versions of narcissists. Maybe they want to be the big fish in a small pond. I think that's what Julius Caesar had said too. He said he'd rather be first in charge in any other country than second in charge in Rome. Why is that? He would rather be a big fish in a small pond. And I guarantee you there's narcissists like that too. People that want to be the hotshot farmer or the hotshot business owner in the small town. If they go into the city, now there's tons more competition. And now they're just average in comparison to the people in the city. They're not going to like that. They would rather be a big fish in a small pond. Now, some of them, they'll go to the city and they'll thrive on the competition. And they'll be like Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. He'll be in competition with what's his face, Paul Allen, and they compare their business cards and they compare their apartments, but they're going to try to climb that social ladder and seek more status. So they kind of thrive on that competition. But there's different versions out there, I would say. Ellie says they're about to write the book, Small Town Narcs Abound. You should write the book, Ellie. I'm all for it. I endorse it.
vulnerable people who are watching that content who are not narcissistic, but already feel like they don't measure up. And we've created this really messy space of people who already devalue themselves, looking at these lives far better than theirs and wondering, what's wrong with me?
Roughly 1 in 6 people have a podcast. So I was just wondering.
I mean, that many people think they have something that interesting to say, right? So,
And so Steven here, he's like thinking, am I a narcissist? And you know what? He might have some narcissistic traits, absolutely. I mean, and granted, I think most of us that are doing these, we could probably be considered having narcissistic traits for sure. And he's like, 1 in 6 people have a podcast. Is it really that many? I guess I wouldn't surprise me. But yeah, he's going to start going down this line of questioning here. You see his questions? He's kind of trying to figure out, I think, if he's one.
And like I said, everybody's trying to put their voice out there, their vacation pictures out there, their breakfast pictures out there are not narcissistic. I think in some cases, I don't think we should over pathologize what has become a new way of interacting. It's interesting. I have children. My daughters are now both in their early 20s, and I'll watch their facility, but I see what they're doing. It's not narcissism. It's actually communication. And they're staying in touch with a very large net of widely spread friends. And there is a lot of intimacy there. So I think young people whose cognition kind of also grew with it, they use it in a more sort of seamless way. Listen, what's it been around now? We're going to soon come 20 years, around 20 years since social media has been around, right? We're rounding that horn soon. We're going to it's going to take a minute to get the data. We're going to get our first set of data from the kids whose lives were captured from the day they plopped onto a delivery table all the way right through adolescence. That data is going to be very telling. I don't think it's created more narcissism. I think we've always had grandiose narcissists. I think they make history. They've been our leaders. They're the people we've always looked to. They've been the town mayor, whatever. I think what it has done, though, it's taken this problem of vulnerable narcissism and it's really blown it up, because the vulnerable narcissistic people get super resentful when they perceive other people as having these awesome lives that they don't, and they get more angry. And this is sort of the advent of the internet troll. A lot of that is explained by vulnerable narcissism.
I don't know if it's only vulnerable narcissism that explains a narcissistic troll. I think there's just simply people that are antagonistic. I think there's people that are antagonistic and they just enjoy picking fights online. I mean, I've literally heard narcissists tell me, people that knew they were narcissists, by the way, and I agreed with their assessment, they would say it in an offhanded way. And they would say, I pick fights with people to calm down. So would you call them a vulnerable narcissist? Not really, I would say. No, they're just a little more on the sadistic side, and they want to be antagonistic. They like baiting and provoking people into emotional reactions, and that's just what they did for fun. It was like a hobby for them. But I also agree with Dr. Ramani that there's always been grandiose narcissists. There's been people that have been the mayor of the small town. This has always been the case. In terms of vulnerable, like I said, I'm not even sure I'm the biggest fan of the term vulnerable narcissism, because in terms of what I see as the problematic people, I think there may be more coverts sometimes. The vulnerables, a lot of times they don't even get involved. They're the people that are getting rejected, I would say, by a lot of women. They're just like, they're too much. They're too much of the Eeyore routine, woe's me. So they don't even get their foot in the door. The guys that I see cause the most trouble in romantic relationships, they're not like that, at least right away. Like, they have a little better front. They have a better mask. They present better. And then later on, they might have some of that stuff come out underneath. And they're the ones that want to be coddled. They'll turn their romantic partners into their mother, and they want to be babied and told they're there. But it's just never enough. And it's like that quote that I made from the guy who wrote the book. Not Kite Runner, not 1,000 Splendid Suns, but the other one, of which, of course, I can't remember. But he had a great paragraph about it in there. It's one of the best definitions. It's not even a definition of narcissism, but the best description of narcissism without using the word narcissist. It was pretty cool.
So where does narcissism come from then? It's
Well,
one of the big questions. From what you said there, I assume there might be a genetic component that's brought out by our childhood, or
So we're all born with a temperament, right? I don't know if you're an only child, if you have siblings or anything
youngest
like that.
of four.
You're youngest of four. Okay,
Yeah.
so this is harder for you. So it'd be interesting for you to talk with them. Is that, and your parent, whoever was parents, whoever were around, every one of you and your siblings had slightly different personalities from the day you were born. And that rolled out in early childhood. So you'll see that one kid who's just easy breezy from the day they're born. You'll sometimes see that kid who's just a clenched up ball of nerves from the day they're born. You'll see that kid who just doesn't want to chill for a minute from the day they're born. That stuff is called temperament. And what we know about temperament is that there are certain temperaments and those that make a child more biologically vulnerable, a little bit more difficult to soothe. They may be more, they just sort of need more, right? So they're more of a demand on a caregiver. With that more vulnerable temperament, if that comes up against an environment that's at all invalidating, trauma, neglect, other adversities, chaos, domestic violence, substance use in the family, or even emotional abuse, where the child is just being told, stop, sit down, shut up, why can't you be like your sisters, right? That combination can actually set up a real risk for developing narcissism. So that's pathway one.
And so this is one that I don't know if it's a risk of developing narcissism. This goes into the nature versus nurture debate, right? On one hand, I agree with Stephen. There's a large genetic component to personality and to pathology, right? And Dr. Ramani agrees with that. Now, again, where do you fall on the ladder, though? Do you think it is a majority genetic? Do you think the environmental component is just as important? Do you think the narcissists are created because of their trauma? This just depends on where you fall. And for me personally, like if you look at Dr. Eatonson and you look at Dr. Salerno's stance, I'm probably in the middle of them if I had to guess. I agree with them both on some things. You could say maybe on Salerno, I agree certainly more with some things, but there's a couple good points I think Dr. Eatonson makes too. But this idea of, and that's part of what Dr. Eatonson was talking about too. It's the environment's job to meet the child where they are. And if it doesn't happen, that could be considered a trauma. And that could explain why some people don't think they've been traumatized. Granted, that definition of trauma, I think that's a little bit of a liberal definition of trauma, because just like abuse, right? If everything's abuse, then the threshold to be called abuse is very low. And I kind of think the same thing about trauma. If everything is trauma and the threshold becomes so low, is that really helpful? I'm not sure. But even the best parenting, I don't think it's going to do a perfect job. There can always be things that get missed. They're not going to be able to read the kid's mind because not every kid's going to be able to articulate their needs. Not every kid's going to have an easily identifiable like pattern. They're not going to be able to say, okay, they need this. This is how they need love. It's not always going to be easy, especially if there's other issues going on. Maybe a kid is a level 1 autism. That's going to add more variables. If there's other mental issues, mood disorder issues, that's going to add more variables. So it's going to be more difficult for the environment to meet the needs in those cases.
Pathway 2, and this is actually coming out of really interesting work by a guy named Eddie Brommelmans from the University of Amsterdam. It's fascinating work. And he is studying more sort of what's the other pathway? Well, the other pathway, and other folks like Masterson and others have written about this, which is the overvalued child. These are the children who are told, you're more special than any other child. Not that you're special.
And so she's basically saying the Sam Vaknin method of turning into a narcissist. You were either neglected and abused, or you were spoiled and put on the pedestal, and that creates the narcissist. But like Rhodes said in the chat, not everyone who has been traumatized becomes a narcissist. Not everyone who has been hurt hurts people. Why is that? The difference is there's that genetic component, I would say. There's something innate in them that's just a little bit different. And the people that don't turn into these pathologically disordered people, they just don't have that element. Like they don't have the element. The people that do, they did. So the same environment, one person turns into one and the other person doesn't. What explains it? To me, it's always been the genetic part that explains that aspect.
But you are more special than him and her, so you shouldn't have to wait in a line. You're more special. You should get the teacher you want. You should get everything you want. Those children often, they don't learn to self-soothe. They often aren't as well regulated. They actually kind of believe the hype that the parent is giving them, which is not doing them any favors. And Brommelmans is suggesting that this could sort of be a foreshadowing of what could turn into adult narcissism. I'm guessing you need that temperament on board. I think if you had a sweet-tempered kid, that constantly being told that they're special actually might leave the sweet-tempered kid feeling a little bit guilty, actually. But the kid with that more vulnerable temperament, they might buy into the hype. So you sort of have this one pathway of adversity. You have the one pathway of sort of, these are kids who are told, you're great, you can have anything you want, we'll do anything you want, let's go on this vacation, here's this device. But they're also kids that are often very emotionally undernourished. Their emotions are not valued, they're not reflected, they're not mirrored. So these are kids who are get, but it's a very tenuous existence because they're still not in touch with their emotional world, which has to happen in childhood. Otherwise, you don't get that you don't get that atlas of your own emotions, right? So those tend to be the two primary pathways. Now, not every kid who goes through those pathways will become narcissistic. In fact, the vast majority will not. So I think that it's very complicated, and what we call it's multi-determined. It's a very multi-determined.
Yeah, I was going to say, so what does she think happens here? So she's multi-determined. And that's more along the lines of what Dr. Eatonson was saying, honestly. That's what he says. Many pass to MPD. But let's see what else she says.
Determined series of pathways to what leads to adult narcissism. And because of that, I always say narcissism is one of those stories we can always tell backwards, but it's really difficult to tell forwards. Don't show me your 17-year-old who has a lot of attitude and won't empty the dishwasher and calls you names, and don't ask me if he's narcissistic. I usually tell those parents, call me in 10 years.
Now this is the one biggest thing I disagree with her on here, is that because as Dr. Salerno and I have talked about many times, there's kids that have pathological issues, pathological narcissism. Maybe they're borderline, maybe they're worse, maybe they're psychopathic. That absolutely happens. And as me, I'm someone that used to work in teen rehabs for teens, behavioral communities for teens. And there was all sorts of troubled people in there that continued to be troubled. And I think that argument that, oh, if they're 17, call back in 10 years, that completely neglects the genetic aspect of it there. If they have those innate traits, that's there. That's already there. And to say, push it off 10 years, they could destroy their life by then. They can destroy other people's lives by then. So I don't like that suggestion by Dr. Ramani at all. In fact, I agree more with Dr. Campbell. At the end of my interview with Dr. Campbell, we went over something that a lot of people have asked for, but advice for dealing with a narcissistic kid if you're a parent. And he has the CPR method, it's called, where it's compassion, responsibility, and passion. So basically, that's a way to work with the hand that the kids have been dealt. You use that CPR method because if they have those innate traits, they're not going away. They're there. So what do you do once they're there? The only thing you can do is work with it. That's where the CPR method comes in. But yeah, if you have a 17-year-old kid and there's problems, don't wait 10 years. Like, you got to try to get on that because you still got time. You got time for your frontal lobe and your brain to fully develop. Now, this veers off into another discussion though too, right? Where how much can you change the developmental brain before your frontal lobe is developed? That's a good question for a neuroscientist. That's a good question for Dr. Salerno. That's a good question for Dr. Eatonson. I don't know the answer to that question. So it's like if you have deficits in the areas of the brain responsible for empathy, can that change as your frontal lobe develops? Can that change? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know. How much can neuroplasticity change it? I don't know.
And in 10 years, you're going to see if this tracked or he pops out of it like every adolescent who's trying to kind of individuate from his parents and settles down into a decent guy.
You mentioned that narcissism exists on a spectrum. So does that mean that someone can be a little bit narcissistic?
I would say somebody can have milder narcissistic presentation. So what I mean by milder, the mild narcissistic people, the best adjective I could use, they're annoying, they're emotionally immature, they're superficial, they're shallow, they're vapid, and they're also very self-centered. So these are people, when they're having a problem, they expect the world to stop for them, take their calls, talk to them for hours. But the day finally comes that you need your friend, they're nowhere to be seen. Like, oh, I don't have time for this. So it can feel like a very, very imbalanced relationship. And when you're with,
and that's why I say everything a narcissist does is on their terms. When they need you, you better be there quick. If they say jump, they just want you to ask how high. But then if you ever need something from them, oh, nowhere to be found. All of a sudden now it's not so important anymore because it's your needs and not theirs. Their needs are way up here. They think they're extremely important. But since they have impaired empathy, your needs, they don't really care too much about your needs. Another good example of this is if, say, you don't reply back to a narcissist right away, a lot of times they get very upset by that and they'll start hounding you. Reply. Where are you? And then meanwhile, if you text them, they might ghost you for days or may never respond. And that's fine. That's fine in their world. But if you do it to them, the end of the world. And what is this? A double standard, right? If you match their actions and they don't like it, that's a big problem. That speaks to their hypocritical natures and their self-centered natures as well.
Them, the mild narcissists can actually be kind of fun, right? They're like, let's go to this new hot hip whatever, blah blah blah, and they're fun and laugh and dance and attention seeking. Could be fun for a minute, but it would be very difficult to have a long-term committed relationship with someone like that. It'd be difficult to raise children with someone like that. It would have been very difficult to have been raised by someone like that.
Are narcissists more successful professionally?
Yes. They're much more successful. That's the problem. And not, I mean, again, and I'm not going to make this a blank.
And I don't know if it's across the board, but there are certainly many narcissistic people that are successful. Why? Well, we live in a culture that rewards narcissistic behaviors. We live in a culture that rewards their very nature. If society is narcissistic and we live in an epidemic of narcissism, is there any surprise that narcissists rise to the top of these societal structures? They rise to the top of these hierarchies. Not a coincidence. Not a coincidence, if you ask me.
Statement, but I'm going to tell you now that they're more ambitious. Success is life or death to them, right? Because it's validation. It's the blood that flows through their psyche. So the stakes are much higher for them. The rest of us, we want to succeed, but at the end of the day, we would say, I've got my family, I got my friends, I got enough money in the bank, I got some food in my belly, like I'm good. But for them, it's the air in their lungs. So they're more represented in leadership. They make more money, especially narcissistic men make more money than agreeable men. They're more successful at dating. They're more successful. And unfortunately, the way our economy is set up, it is set up so that the narcissistic people win. Narcissism and capitalism go together really well because it's a competitive system that rewards the person who does the most. And we don't look at process, we look at outcome. And
that's a good point by Dr. Ramani. Narcissism and capitalism, they do go hand in hand like peas and carrots.
Anytime you have an outcome heavy metric, narcissistic people are always going to win.
I'm thinking about some of the greatest companies that have been built that changed the world, Apple being one of them. Oftentimes when you hear about how these people treated other people, it sounds like the narcissistic characteristics that you described earlier, but then we often excuse that because of what they brought into the world, the great innovations, the great companies they built, how they helped change the world, how they maybe led us through or out of war. Mm-hmm. So what do you say to that? Is it sometimes worth their narcissism for what they gave the world?
So here's a rub. I completely agree with what you're saying. I actually think that some of the greatest innovations, greatest creativity, in fact, many wartime presidents and prime ministers had to be narcissistic, right? And might have gotten countries, people through messes, might have had the decisive postures that were necessary, that might have made the really, really kinds of difficult corporate decisions that needed to make with little regard for how the human beings were going to get hurt, treated people in a way, pushed them to an inhuman limit. And then there was this thing that came out of it. Was it worth it? I mean, now we're in philosophy, honey, and I'm a psychologist, but suffice it to say, there's always been talk, like even inventors like Thomas Alva Edison was not a nice guy, right? Some archival research. Loving these light bulbs, right? Would someone else have done it? It's a moot point. He did. And so I think the innovations are important. I think narcissistic people are built for innovation. They're grandiose. They're dreamers. They want the adulation. They want to do the big thing. They want to be on the big tech stage and have all the lights on them and have all the attention while they have the beautiful video and the simple thing. And they want that. That is their everything. And what I tell people is we're never going to have a world without them. We have gotten lots of cool stuff in our lives from them. Just don't marry them.
And that's a fair point there by Dr. Ramani. I think maybe we'll stop this one here because there's a lot more to go. And maybe we'll return to it at a point. But that's a good thing to go over there too, that Yeah, narcissists, plenty of them do contribute a lot to the world. Maybe it's inventions, maybe it's businesses, maybe they're athletes, maybe they're musicians, maybe they're entertainers. All of that's true. All of that's true. But like Dr. Ramani said, you don't want to marry them. They contribute a lot to society, and they also get their genes passed down through the generations. That is also without a doubt. Because again, like women are the gatekeepers of the next generation. How are they gatekeepers? How are they the gatekeepers of the next generation? Well, they decide who they mate with. They decide what guys' genes get passed down. And guess what? There's a lot of guys who are narcissistic. Their genes are absolutely getting passed down. So if you look at the genetic argument there, there's going to be no shortage of narcissism in the future. And if anything, it's just becoming more prevalent, right? I think there's more narcissistic people now than there was by percentage and just by pure volume of it all. They're just here. They're everywhere. So, well, this is something that people will have to deal with in the future here. Now, that's where people like me come in and all the rest of the creators. Here we are. We're all talking about it. So maybe people will have more awareness in the future. But this is something I haven't heard someone talk about yet. I think narcissism can adapt. I think diseases, sicknesses, they evolve. And is there a reason to believe that narcissism might not evolve? I think it absolutely could. Why couldn't it? So once it evolves, what will it evolve into? Like people would like to think, oh, the narcissistic behaviors are just going to stay the same. There's going to be no adjustments. They're not going to change. And I would say that's not really how evolution works there. Things change. And if enough narcissists get seen through so that they don't pass their genes down, maybe it will evolve. Now, the other side of it is, well, most people are not learning about it in time. So when people are younger, they're the least likely to know about it. And the genes are still getting passed down from men and from women. Thank you, Rhodes, by the way. I had a good time with Mark Vicente. Everyone should check that out if they haven't already. I got to work on how often I say like. I was listening to that interview again. I'm like, damn, I say like too much. It's my filler word. And I have to learn to pause instead of saying like. I had to just remind myself every time I make a video. It's not an issue when I do a short. It's not an issue when I even do a longer recorded video. It's just in a live stream or in an interview, no likes allowed. So is another bad one, but not as bad as like, I would say. But I like the fact that we talked about addiction. We talked about autism. We talked about the people that pander to women. We talked about Sadia Khan. He was asking me what my big problem with Sadia Khan was. And it's really just that she's a liar. She lies about her credentials and deceives people. And the fact that she abuses the people that disagree with her. That's my biggest problem with her. The second biggest problem that I didn't mention is that she basically blames the victims. She blames the victims of narcissistic abuse for the issue and said, nope, this is your fault. It's happening. Victim blaming. I couldn't remember that one, but I've gone over that before in other videos. That's what she's doing. She's blaming them. She doesn't really understand it. Or if she does, she's just defending narcissists because she has admitted she's one. And when I broke down her and Nick Cannon, that video was titled Two Narcissists Talk About Narcissism for a Reason, because they both are. And that was pretty vomit-inducing, watching them talk back and forth, watching how much Sadia is freaking fawning over Nick Cannon there and just basking in the glow of his celebrity. That was obnoxious. There's nothing more obnoxious than seeing a pleased narcissistic person being with other high status people. So they think, ugh, hideous, just hideous. George says, yes, entitled behaviors are prevalent these days. Yes, they are. Kelly and I were talking about that too. She said so many conversations, they lack empathy And there's so many people that are just entitled. They just are. Ellie says, absolutely, they will mutate. Healthy evolves. I think we're going to be in for that. Now, is it going to happen soon? I don't know. I'd be lying if I told you I did know. But I do think AI is going to contribute as well. I think that has a part to play. I don't know what part it's going to be, but there's going to be a part. Do you want a fake dentist? Then why would you want a fake counselor? I agree with you there. Because again, she's a relationship coach. That is all Sadia Khan is. And if she would have labeled herself as a relationship coach, I wouldn't have had nearly as much of a problem with her. I still would have disagreed with her content in some cases, but the big issue is you're lying about your credentials, and now everyone's going to invite you on their show based on that lie, and those creators deserve to be called out as well because they didn't do their due diligence, and they enabled more abuse to continue. Why did they do that? Because Sadia was good for ratings. Sadia was good for eyeballs on their channels, views, attention, money. So they overlooked it. And I don't think that's cool. It's not cool that they overlooked it. So I don't like how Sadia talks about victims. And she also makes a lot of mass generalizations as well. It's just unnecessary. Now, I don't disagree with everything she says. That's true too. She does say some things I agree with as well. But she just does the sweeping generalizations routine. And even sometimes Dr. Ramani can do that a little bit too, but not as bad. Like even in this interview with Steven there, she made sure she had some nuance there. She made sure to not say always, and there's going to be a spectrum of narcissism, a spectrum of empathy. Dr. Ramani agrees with that, so I give her a round of applause for that. Right, coach is a fair title. Fake diploma is wrong. Absolutely. Like I said, all I am is a coach, or as I affectionately call myself, the wizard. That's all I am, a wizard. I'm not an LCSW. I'm not an LPC. I'm not a clinical psychologist. I'm not a psychiatrist. I'm just spitballing. I'm spitballing from my addictions counseling days. I'm spitballing from my master's of mental health counseling days. But most of all, I'm spitballing from my own experience and what I've learned from my predecessors, people like Meredith Miller, people like Sam Vaknin, people like Richard Grannon, people like Dr. Grande. Those are the people that were the OGs in my day. And Surviving Narcissism by Dr. Les Carter. He was back in my OG days. Those were the big ones I learned from. And they were like, when I was dying of thirst in the desert, they were my water. And I learned. I was addicted to their content. I learned all about it. And then I took it to the next level, right? I learned about it on my own. I learned about it in books. I kept an open mind and talked to people like Dr. Eatonson, Dr. Salerno, Dr. George Simon, everybody. And so what I do is I try to listen to everybody, and I kind of pick and choose the parts that I resonate with and agree with, and I kind of discard some of the rest. And I think that's what we all should be doing, right? Listen to everybody. Listen to everybody because you just don't know. You don't know who you're really going to agree with. You don't know what you're not going to agree with until you hear it. But some people, they can't even tolerate even hearing opinions they don't agree with. A good example of this, HG Tudor right now. He's doing a Tudor scope of, drum roll please, Candace Owens. And even in the first episode, people that really like Candace were really getting upset because like, HG Tudor's making generalizations about my favorite girl, Candace. And HG Tudor's like, hey, it's not about her views. It's not about whether she's a conservative or a progressive or whatever she calls herself now. It's about narcissism. That's it. That's what the Tudor scope is about. So he's done 8 parts on that so far, 8-part Tudor series. Check that out if you haven't. And maybe I'll have HG Tudor back on the show here coming up soon too. I haven't tried that yet. Surprise you with your titles, eh? I'll be Jared the White Wizard, or the Blue Wizard, or the Gray. Oh, my announcements for you all. Dr. Carrie McAvoy, December 1st, I'm speaking to her. Probably upload that the day after. Josh from the UK. The hell's his name? But December 4th, as of right now, that's penciled in. So we'll be having those discussions there too. Kelly, I'm sure, will come back on soon. Marcella, I got to get her on board here too. Neuroscientist. Who's the neuroscientist, George? I love to hear that, Ellie. I love the people that are learners for life. ABL, I call it. Always be learning. Always be learning and always be open-minded. That's the key. Oh, me. Yes, good. I thought you were going to say Sam Harris, the neuroscientist. Who's another big neuroscientist? Is Andrew Huberman a neuroscientist, or is he something else? The bro. Andrew Huberman, the bro neuroscientist. I don't mind Andrew Huberman now. I think he's got a lot of haters now, though. I think people jealous because he's an attractive lad that the ladies liked, and some people don't like that. Some people get a little jealous, a little envious, if I had to guess. But if you all want, I can come back to that, Dr. Ramani. I went over the most interesting parts, though, in my opinion. The parts there might be some disagreements. I think you'd like Milk Bar TV's YouTube channel, Jared. I've never heard of them. But let's see. Milk Bar TVs. See if I can find them for you here. Let's see here. James, welcome to the chat. As an S+ grade asshole, what does S+ mean? I can verify that these narcissists are cry bullies and maliciously regarded. Straight to the loony bin with them. Oh, retarded. I'm not a person that gets offended by those words. I know some people might, but I don't. The part of me that gets offended by words is just missing. So like nothing bothers me, but out of courtesy for others, I sometimes don't say things. But let's check out Milk Bar's channel here. Or Milk TV, I should say. So what should I be looking for here? Oh, World War II, according to Tucker Carlson. Marjorie Taylor Greene's radical flip on Islam Sharia law. Candace Owens. Nick Fuentes. Tucker. Charlie. Where's Dave Smith? He's the only one missing of the crew. There he is. I knew we'd see him. Him and, the hell's his name? Coleman Hughes. There's some good stuff here. I mean, there was going to be an Israel video I was going to break down. This guy did the Israel's accusations are confessions video. I might go over that, although I might get a lot of hate for going over that. I don't know how many pro-Israel people I have following me, but I'm sure they'd be pissed if I went over that. Oh, he is he? Milk TV? Why? Why is that happening? There he is. Let's see.
Andrew Tate has now publicly claimed that I, an Australian father who makes so...
Let's start this here. So this is the video where he goes it over. Let's see.
Andrew Tate has now publicly claimed that I, an Australian father who makes social media videos on many topics, and others he is suing, are somehow working for British intelligence.
If you've been paying attention, you'll see I'm currently engaged in about 15 lawsuits. And all of these accounts that were constantly slandering me, insulting me, were psyops. They were getting paid by British intelligence services.
I can tell you, I don't work for the British government.
This was a setup from the highest level of MI5. It was the Brits.
The people named in this
See, Andrew Tate, like years ago, he was more legit to me years ago. I didn't disagree with everything he said back in the day. I think he was intelligent, but now he's kind of turned into a clown. Now he's just kind of like a clown. Like he went to his meteoric rise, then got in all the trouble, and rightfully so, considering what he's done. Sure. Now, what is the truth? What's not the truth? I don't know. There's so much BS to sift through. It's hard to say. But now he's just, to me, a shell. He's a shell of himself, and he became the character, right? He was always playing a character, and some of him was funny back in the day, but then he kind of like became the character, and now he's just this like grotesque thing that it's just, you can't take him seriously anymore. And it is what it is. Well, let's see what else he has to say. Then that's what it is, George. It's all just about, once you're in the spotlight, the one thing you don't want to do is lose the spotlight. So he's going to do everything he can to stay relevant.
lawsuit include individuals with disabilities, survivors of abuse, and ordinary citizens.
This whole thing was a setup head to toe because they were scared I was going to overthrow an election in the UK.
What we've done is shared court documents, social media posts, Andrew Tate's own videos to bring awareness to the criminal cases. But while this claim may sound ridiculous, the lawsuit itself is very serious. Andrew Tate has openly talked about targeting critics with his lawsuits.
I don't care if it costs me $1 million to take $1,000 out of your bank. You're going to be in court twice a month for the rest of your human years. I don't care. I will sue you for any and every reason forever. And you're going to have to hire lawyers and turn up forever. I will do that. I'm that guy. I'm petty. I'm petty and I've got a lot of money and a lot of time. So it's not even about guilty. It's not about why. It's just about because I can.
Legal costs are already piling up, and we urgently need your help to fight this in court. Every contribution goes directly to securing strong legal representation so we can defend our right to speak openly and report on publicly available information without fear.
Aha. It's a good name there. Truthversustate.com. Very clever. Very clever. Now, here's the thing with Candace, right? If you look into her, there's all sorts of inconsistencies if you don't just take what she says at face value. What she's great at is she has like an antagonistic tone, a condescending tone. And it's like, if you disagree with her, the implication is you're a fool. You're a fool because you disagree. But if you ever press her on things, like she was on the news the other day, there was some interview that she did on the MSM, mainstream media, and they were giving her some pushback. And what you saw at the end of the pushback was there's really not much backing up what she's saying. A lot of what she's doing is leading the witness, and then her followers fill in the gaps. That's what I see. And there's this guy named Moderate IG. He kind of breaks down some of her things as well. And I agreed with his breakdowns of Candace. Now, Moderate IG, though, he's a very pro-Israel guy. And I'm not necessarily very pro-Israel anymore. Like, I think they've gone too far with some things. But I did agree with him about Candace. I'll say that. But I don't agree with the other things. I was fighting with the people in the comments on Instagram about that. But yeah, Rhodes, definitely check out HG's series on her. 8 videos deep so far. It's going to be at least 9 or 10. And when you go through it, this is what you'll learn. You're going to learn that she's a massive hypocrite, for one. She does everything that she like criticizes others for. Like, oh, suing people is an absurd, childish thing. She sues countless people. And she has lots of grandiosity, lots of entitlement. And if you just know the facts, they're there. And that's what HG Tudor goes over. He goes over all these facts. And a lot of the Candace fans, they checked out after the first episode because they said, oh no, HG Tudor is not objective enough. He's letting his biases get in the way. It's like, no. HG Tudor, I think he's probably a little more on the right, if anything, but maybe not. But he's just giving an unbiased take. and they couldn't take it because their girl, they couldn't take any criticism of their girl. And they turned into flying monkeys for her real quick. And they were lashing out. And it was wild to see. And he even addressed it too. He goes, some of you have to learn to take a step back and not get so married to the beliefs or married to just a critique of the personality structure of somebody. That shouldn't be such a big thing. But for them, it was. They were not like, they didn't like that at all. But that's what she's capitalizing on, right? I bet you there's a lot of narcissistic people that like Candace and they just kind of go with it. And again, does that mean Candace is wrong about everything? No. But what I will say is I think people are fooling themselves if they think what she's doing isn't about attention and narcissistic supply. She just found her avenue to do that. She's the antagonistic truth seeker. I'm going to ask the questions that nobody asks. I'm going to focus on the topics that nobody wants to. And that's just her niche. And lo and behold, there's a lot of people that want to watch people doing those things. That's what we've learned. And her, Tucker Carlson, Nick Fuentes, they're the top three. They're the top three of the new right people right now. And it's not even close. It's not even close. I think the old school conservatives, Dennis Prager, Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, Steven Crowder, even Tim Pool, I think they're kind of off the boat on this. They're behind. They're the pro-Israel crowd. And pro-Israel crowd is just not winning. They are not winning the right civil war right now. And what's going to happen with that, I don't know. But time will tell. Time answers all questions, right? But all right, we're getting off the topic here. I'll probably be back on tomorrow night to talk about something else. I got to hunt for some more interviews. So if any of you have some more interview suggestions for me, let me know. Maybe I should invite Truth for Tate on. Maybe I should invite, what the hell is his name again? Milk Bar TV. If you want to, I'll try to invite him on. Maybe some other, because I'll talk to anybody. But the thing is, when you talk to political folks, you got to have your homework done. Because if you don't have all of your homework done, they can try to poke holes in you. All right, everybody. Rhodes, George, Ellie. George was here, but no Jolly. No Jolly, no Bear, no Old Bear. Who else is missing? Several missing people that might get a demerit. But no demerit for George today. No demerit for George. Yes, you do take turns, George, you do. All right, everybody. Good night, good fight, as they would say. Good night, good fight. And Phil Bradley, you can't forget him.